So Katie, anything going on in the world of crypto over the last week?
There's a life-altering event in the world of crypto this past week.
You're talking about FTX's bankruptcy.
I am.
It's huge.
It is huge.
Well, we've got Bloomberg TV for all the breaking news, but we want to talk about crime, and it's not necessarily crime associated with the downfall of FTX. Mm-hmm. Innocent until proven guilty.
It is being investigated.
But a different type of crime when it comes to crypto, specifically Bitcoin and crime, and whether or not Bitcoin is actually good for crime.
And whether it needs to be if we're thinking about money laundering.
Bitcoin has been closely associated with crime since pretty much the beginning. In the early days, it was the currency of choice on the dark web, used in drug deals and even a murder-for-hire plot. In more recent years, it's been what hackers have demanded when they've held pipelines, hospital systems, and meatpacking plants hostage. And then there've been the hacks. October 2022 is on track to see more crypto stolen in hacks than any other month this year, and 2022 is on pace to be a record according to Chainalysis. But is Bitcoin actually good for crime? Since all transactions are public on the blockchain, everyone can see Bitcoin move on the blockchain. And governments and other organizations are getting better at recovering stolen Bitcoin. Plus, it's not actually that easy to launder Bitcoin, to turn lots of it into real usable money. This raises an important question. If Bitcoin isn't good at crime, then how can it live up to its promise as a stateless currency that could allow people in oppressed areas to transact with one another without a regulator seeing what they're up to?
Joe Weisenthal of the Odd Lots podcast. We're not going to get into the FTX collapse, but you wrote back in February that it's time for Bitcoin and crypto in general to get better at crime. And we're talking about a different type of crime that FTX is being investigated for, potentially more along the lines of money laundering. So lay out your case for us.
Well, you know, like one of the core arguments that like Bitcoiners make is that it's like separation of money and state, right? And that it's a sort of form of money that doesn't rely on the government. It doesn't rely on traditional banking system, et cetera. And when I wrote the piece, it was, if you recall, it was like during the Canadian trucking protests, and there was that big convoy. And setting aside what one's view of the protests were, which I think is like kind of irrelevant to the question. The point is, if there's going to be a moment where people needed a form of money that could they could transact without censorship, that was it. And it didn't really work for that. They were able to very easily track the transactions. They were able to freeze wallets from interacting with banks. So it's if Bitcoin is going to live up to its promise of being a means of transaction that is separate from the state, separate from the financial institutions, I don't think it's there yet in terms of whether it's privacy or obfuscation or things like that.
So you're essentially saying that if Bitcoin is to live up to its promise of being this stateless currency, something that could help an oppressed people, then it actually needs to be something that would also be good for criminals.
I think that, that would be the implication. Because again, what's a criminal in one country or one city could just be a protester somewhere else. So to some extent, this distinction is going to be very vague. Well, some places protest is crime. Some place free speech is crime. And so the point is that for it to fulfill its mission, then on some level there has to be a way to transact with it without the state being able to say, you got these coins, and now these coins, if they ever go to an exchange, if they ever go to a fiat off-ramp, they'll be frozen. What is the point then?
I think part of the reason I've been thinking about this column that you wrote for, 8, 9 months is that it kind of made me think that crime is really subjective. Crime to one person, to one government, is not a crime to another government.
Yeah, right. There are certain categories of crimes that everyone would find to be absolutely horrific.
You shouldn't kill people.
Absolutely. But there are other, in different situations, sending someone or selling a copy of the Bible might be a crime in some countries, or a different religious text, or any other sort of protest or whatever it is. And so, that's exactly right. How would you even begin to conceive of a currency that would work for what we would call legitimate crime or legitimate dissidence within a country if it didn't work for things that we would consider to be reprehensible?
But it works to a certain extent. And that's what it seems like, at least, because we are seeing still ransomware attacks that are, essentially say, pay us X Bitcoin or else.
Yeah, although even ransomware attacks, there's a pretty big loss of market share by Bitcoin that we've seen to like some of the privacy coins. Like I think, like if you look around, like Monero, which is a much smaller, less liquid, less market cap coin, is still popular among ransomware attacks, in part because of this reason. It's like has privacy built into it from like the ground up.
Wait, so if you're a criminal and you want to do some crime, which is the right,
I would never suggest, but I do think that it speaks to, again, like, ransomware is really bad. So this is not about that. The point is like, well, then if it doesn't work for these, then what are like the sort of like freedom, sort of like outside the state, outside the financial institutions use cases that it does work for? Because the point that I see is like, okay, they say is like, no one can block a Bitcoin transaction, no one can censor it. But isn't it a de facto form of censorship if an entity can say, these wallets can no longer move to an exchange?
And I think that's an important sort of setup there, that you can do the hack and get Bitcoin in exchange.
Yes.
It's just you can't really do anything with the Bitcoin that you
get. And there's all kinds, like chain analysis is getting better and better, so it becomes easier to like connect an individual to a wallet and so forth. And like law enforcement and private software companies are getting like really good at this. But if there's a point where it's like really hard to disassociate a coin from a human name, from someone that is known to officials, then you start to, I think, lose some of the promise of the currency.
It's the point of anything, really.
Well, that's it.
It's a whole different episode.
The philosophy show.
Joe Weisenthal, this was a delight.
Thank you for having me. I'd love to be back.
Beth Bisbee from Chainalysis, Sujit Raman from TRM Labs. It's good to have you both here with us. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having us.
What do you think of the crime scene?
It's great. Very realistic.
Is this what it's like? Is this what it's like when you investigate a crypto crime?
Yeah. In the digital world, this is exactly what it's like.
With all the coins.
All the coins, the yellow, crime scene.
We're going for something that's really authentic, so that's some good feedback. Hey, Beth, I want to start with you. Just give us an idea of the most shocking crime you've ever seen committed with crypto.
So if I go back to my days when I was with the Drug Enforcement Administration, it was with drug traffickers, and anywhere from drug trafficking with money laundering using crypto for drug cartels, or your run-of-the-mill individuals that were down in their grandparents' basement selling drugs on the internet. So those are shocking in and of themselves, and like how the individuals actually like benefited from it and leveraging crypto for that.
When I think about drugs and I think about Bitcoin and I think about them both together, I think about Silk Road. Like, is that the sort of stuff that we're talking about?
Yeah, so kind of both, right? So the very first really play of drugs and crypto is Silk Road, right? That was one of the most innovative spaces for somebody to be like, how do I get this onto the black market without being detected by law enforcement? And then this was a generation of leveraging Tor and the digital realm of what payment system was, which was crypto. And that's what created Silk Road. So for the traditional sense of the digital aspect for drug trafficking, yes, that would be what it is. However, anytime you have a type of crime, you can leverage crypto for that. So drug trafficking in the traditional sense, where you have the actual bulk movement of large kilos of drugs, individuals can still accept payment with that through crypto.
Sujit, same question. Most shocking crime using Bitcoin?
They weren't necessarily shocking to me because criminals often go where the sort of technology is. But the first time I was really struck by how interesting crypto really could be was when I read the indictments charging those Russian intelligence officers with interfering in the elections in 2016. Because if you read those indictments, you'll see that intelligence officers were using crypto to buy servers within the United States to try to sort of, obscure their tracks and use that to basically purchase the infrastructure that they then used to launch the hacks into the DNC emails and all that. And they even hosted the website that, sort of hosted all that information through the payment of crypto. So when I was in a senior role at the Justice Department, that's the first time I realized, wow, I mean, crime is very important, and all the stuff we're doing on sort of dark web is really important, but there's a foreign intelligence component to this. There's a, defending democracy component to this.
But ultimately, those individuals were indicted.
They were indicted, and the allegations are in the indictment, right?
And in the indictment, you see the evidence of them using, what, was it Bitcoin?
Correct. Various types of crypto.
So the question, well, we'll keep the question to Bitcoin for now and then take it out to other types of crypto. But does that mean that it is or is not an effective means to essentially commit crime with?
So it can be traced, right? And this is something that criminals often don't realize, is that the Bitcoin network itself is quite traceable. And folks like my team at TRM Labs, Beth's team at Chainalysis, have become very good at tracing those payments.
So is it just dumb criminals at this point then? Because I feel like, at least, I don't know, maybe I spend too much time in my own bubble, but I feel like it's pretty well known that you can track things on the blockchain by now.
Well, I think a lot of people maybe don't realize that. The other thing is it still takes time, right? You've got technology like mixers and other types of technology that will help you sort of mix up the transactions a little bit. Even that capability is something law enforcement can see through using the right and the effective tools. But there's a lot of crime out there, and there's limited resources for law enforcement.